Since the dawn of recorded history and found in many cultures across the globe, we encounter again and again the timeless mythologem of a watery void out of which all creation is said to come. In ancient Babylonian culture, we encounter the creation myth of Enuma Elish and its undifferentiated waters swirling in a chaotic void. This myth was later expanded upon in the book of Genesis, where we come across the words, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." The ancient Egyptians spoke of an endless deep, and written in Middle Kingdom hieroglyphic text, we encounter, "I am the eternal spirit. I am the sun that rose from primeval waters. My soul is God. I am the creator of the word. Evil is my abomination. I see it not. I am the creator of the order wherein I live. I am the word which shall never be annihilated in this my name of soul." But it was the Greeks who formulated the most comprehensive description of this not yet a thing. A primordial plenum where time and space are without meaning, and no thing yet exists, but is itself pure potential. To the Greeks, her name was Khaos, and she symbolizes the void womb of the world. She, the primordial abyss and mother of misty essences, was the timeless existent whose being allows for and sustains all of creation. She is quite significant for our meditation as she is the mother and grandmother of airs, the differing types of which serve as precursors of that which we know today as property spaces or quantum fields. For her airs symbolize the notion that empty space may actually contain imperceptible objects, whether a differing air, substance, medium, or field. The word Khaos itself means literally gapes wide open, which is a curious thing to note then, that the same yawning divide happens every time you open your eyes, flood the world with light, and bring the world into being. Two of Khaos's protogenoi were Erebus, the god of darkness who embodied the mists of netherworld shadow, and Nyx, the goddess and substance of night. It was from their dark union that the god of light, Aether, was born, the being whose luminous mists made up the substance of the heavens and formed the breath of lesser God. As to light's universal permeation and its misty substantiality, today we know this ancient Greek intuition to be astonishingly accurate. Aether, as understood today, is a four-vector electromagnetic field constrained by the dynamics of its underlying space-time. It is an ethereal quality of the very vacuum of space, or as the Greeks might say, an air belonging to the void chaos. In 600 BC, the first philosopher and scientist, Thales of Miletus, unknowingly took one of the first steps towards understanding electricity and magnetism. Thales is remembered for having the courage to question his gods, derive a geometrical theorem relating angles drawn within a circle, and like the void womb of the world, claimed that everything in the visible universe was of a single material substance: water. The existentialist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche would later remind us that this fluid metaphysic of Thales is pivotal for three reasons. The first is that it is an attempt to explain the origin of things. The second is that it attempts to explain nature by appealing to nature itself. while simultaneously dispensing with mythological thinking. And finally, the third is because in it is contained, although only in a chrysalis state, the idea, everything is one. Philosophical musing aside, what is interesting for the historical development of our understanding of light is that Thales was the first individual to record the strange phenomenon we know as static electricity. Thales observed that after rubbing a piece of amber with fur, he could lift a feather from his table, seemingly attracting it through thin air. At the time, in Thales' language, amber was known by the name electron, which meant shining sun. This is why, years later, Ampere would name his electrodynamic molecule electron. Through his efforts, we can say that Thales was one of the first people to clearly express our budding rational soul. But he who truly conquered it was Pythagoras. By providing the first indisputable proof in the history of thought, Pythagoras' well-known theorem that reveals hidden numerical relationships in the geometry of objects spurred the Greeks to undergo a cultural and cognitive revolution. Although the Greeks were still saturated in mythological and animistic thinking, Pythagoras' mathematical monument caused immense sociological change, resulting in a new form of government and a novel justice system with a much-needed burden of proof. Aside from the impact this had on the evolution of society, the proof seeded a rational transformation which eventually culminated in the philosophies of Plato and his disciple Aristotle. Plato, knowing of the perfection and ideality of number and geometrical representation, urged us to look beyond the pale of the everyday to uncover a world of perfect form, a transcendental realm of timeless objects perceivable only by the human mind. Plato also believed the everyday world of matter was made up of four fundamental elements: air, water, fire, and earth. And he equated each with a particular kind of atom, a perfect geometrical shape which we today call the Platonic Solids. These immutable solids are complex shapes that acquire their structure through symmetry. If we require that the faces of these various polygonal shapes be identical to one another and meet up at each vertex with equal angles, we arrive at only 5 possible shapes in the entire universe. The first 4, Plato thought, represented the elements. The atoms of fire were tetrahedra, whose sharp points explain the pain caused by its touch. The atoms of water were icosahedra, whose rounded smoothness explained its capacity to flow. The atoms of earth were cubes, and their ability to be packed close together explained its solidity. Finally, the atoms of air were octahedra, which embodied a middle ground between water and fire. But what of the dodecahedron and its implication of a 5th and final element? Plato held that the dodecahedron was no elemental atom, but was instead the shape of the whole universe. This possibility, that the dodecahedron encapsulates and interpenetrates the whole of the cosmos, is beautifully illustrated by Salvador Dali's painting, The Sacrament of the Last Supper, where the placement of the shape is meant not only to embrace the participants of the dinner, but you as the viewer. Now, one might think these perfect Platonic forms are redundant or mere mathematical pleasantries, but symmetry is so powerful a principle that nature uses it to dictate its own design. So much so that we observe living creatures embodying it. Although impossible for Plato to have known, he would have been pleasantly surprised and in awe to learn that in the economy of life, radiolaria and other viruses exploit the strength of these symmetrical principles. For Aristotle, a philosopher who, with his motto that nature abhors a vacuum, anticipated the substantiality of empty space as proved by quantum theory, believed that the dodecahedron didn't represent the shape of the universe, but was in fact the quintessence, etymologically meaning the 5th element. To Aristotle, this celestial element was the Aether, a superfluous and airy medium, an invisible substance hidden in the very blackness of empty space itself. The universe is no empty void, possesses no true vacuum, but is a fullness. As to how anyone sees any image at all, the philosophers of ancient Greece had little to say. Although Aristotle made a poignant observation when he claimed that if the eye were a living creature, its soul would be sight, He was at a loss to explain vision, and so held to the myth that after Aphrodite had created the eye with various portions of the four elements, she lit within it a fire, and its rays shone out of our eyes to land on the objects of our perception, allowing us to see. But what of the Aether as light? How is it that as a concept, it has evolved to obtain a timeless truth and reveal itself as the electromagnetic field and carrier of Maxwell's angel? And knowing that there's no fire in our eyes, how is it that we see? In 1801, Thomas Young proved that light is a wave by performing the first double-slit experiment. By shining a light through a doubly slitted barrier, Young observed an interference pattern on his detection screen, a result that can only be explained by the superposable nature of waves. For when waves of any kind begin to occupy the same place and time, they superpose, and their relative phases will interfere with one another, summing constructively or deconstructively. And the resulting pattern that emerges is called an interference or superposition pattern. With Young's proof as to the wave nature of light, the question then arose, a wave in what? Given that waves need a medium to propagate in, the search began to uncover and confirm the existence of the luminiferous ether, the hypothesized substance thought to carry light. Its discovery was to be found in what seemed to be a completely unrelated area of research, the domain of electricity and magnetism. Through the work of many dearly devoted minds, an understanding of these exotic objects and their effects were just coming into view. And the payoff of all of this wonder and meticulous research culminated in the experimental and theoretical brilliance of Michael Faraday. In his experimental researches in electricity, Faraday coined the term field and argued for its physical existence as an invisible seat of energy and property of mere space. Where everyone, save Aristotle, saw nothing, Faraday saw an imperceivable field of force. Today, we know many fields exist and are quantized. That they are quantized means simply that they entertain unified individuals called quanta, and this enables them to contain and process information. Fields are most easily intuited, as Faraday expressed, as properties of mere space, but they are more accurately bare qualities of the void vacuum. Put differently, fields are distinct modalities of chaos. But let's leave chaos behind by granting to it a kind of substantiality, a substantiality that will allow us to refer to it simply as the ether, an immaterial cosmic fluid that saturates the whole cosmos. Not only did Faraday discover electric and magnetic fields and is immortalized by his law of induction, but his rudimentary invention of the electromagnetic motor helped to kickstart the Industrial Revolution and usher in the electrical age. But as to the real gem that all of this research was unknowingly building towards, was finally revealed to the Scotsman James Clerk Maxwell. Maxwell was a brilliant mathematical physicist with an immeasurable intuition, and after codifying the insights of Faraday into a rigorous mathematical framework, his cerebral genius arrived at the true understanding of what light is, a luminous vibration of dielectric polarization. But before he could reach this insight, as he was steeped in the Newtonian clockwork paradigm, he tried to model the fields of Faraday mechanically, as if they were made of particles, and conceived of their carrier, the ether, as a kind of vortex sponge, with rotating magnetic vortex atoms lubricated by electrical ball bearings. He later abandoned this idea as it was too cumbersome, but it did provide him with the final keystone to completing his electromagnetic theory, the displacement current, a time-varying electrical field that co-produces a magnetic field. With this final piece of the puzzle in place, Maxwell welded together electricity and magnetism and completed the electromagnetic field equation. When he fed them a few experimentally verified constants, their solutions predicted the then measured speed of light. In Maxwell's own words, the velocity of transverse undulations in our hypothetical medium agrees so exactly with the velocity of light that we can scarcely avoid the inference that light consists in the transverse undulations of the same medium which is the cause of electric and magnetic phenomena. For Maxwell, the electromagnetic field held two types of energy, elastic electrical energy as potential, and inertial magnetic energy as kinetic, the combination of which was a kind of electromagnetic momentum. To accommodate these energies, he believed that we are awash in a luminiferous ether, an underlying and invisible medium that was capable of being displaced and set in motion, and that it would transfer that motion as do waves in a pond. This ether was no mere pond, though, but a kind of cosmic fluid interpenetrating the whole universe and was teeming with energy in the form of massless radiation. Essentially, an ocean of formless momentum, an energetic sea of light. By the late 1800s, light was known to be an electromagnetic wave moving at an extremely fast, though finite speed through a luminiferous ether. This ether was thought to be a kind of stationary fluid or medium that saturated the whole universe, and given that, it was believed that we should be able to measure our movement through it, and so began the Etherdrift Experiments. In 1887, through an ingenious way of measuring the comparative distance that light travels, the experimental effort of Michelson and Morley proved an ether of that sort does not exist. There is no static, fluid-like substance that the Earth is floating through. The true ether, however, possesses far more astonishing properties than we had previously conceived. The reason we cannot measure our drift through this medium is because two of its most fundamental functions, namely space and time, conspire to keep the speed of light constant, thereby concealing the ether's true nature. It took Einstein's special theory of relativity to explain why. The simple fact being that there cannot exist an absolute frame of reference with which we or anyone else could compare measurements. If there were, it would violate a core principle of relativity, that of the equivalence of reference frames. If such a violation were to take place, and one could pick out an arbitrary absolute frame of rest, the ordered structure of the cosmos would become incoherent. These facts force upon the ether a kind of elasticity, such that space itself becomes malleable, time can dilate, and the simultaneity of events can shift based on perspective. An ether conceived as a vortex sponge, mechanical medium, or absolute and stationary frame of reference does not exist. But an ether that embodies and obeys the constraints of relativity indeed does. Today we understand the ether to be the electromagnetic field, a bare quality of chaos, or the vacuum, and is a property of mere space itself. We can equate the antecedent existence of the void plenum chaos with an empty spacetime as substance, the spacetime of Einstein's theories of relativity. While the ether as electromagnetic field can be considered one of its overlaid attributes, and one of its many heirs. Indeed, spacetime, like the void, is not nothing. It is a dynamic plenum that underlies everything, and is home to a multiplicity of quantum fields. The ether certainly exists, but it is just constrained by the spatial and temporal dynamics of the void to which it belongs. This background, void-like structure forms the baseless fabric of this vision, of the whole universe. It is baseless in the archaic sense of the word, meaning simply without base, for this tapestry is the ground floor of reality. It is plausible that this cosmic canvas, the ground vacuum of the universe, harbors more than a dynamic space-time, various quantum fields, and a machine code of information processing. It could also be that that entity with which we are so familiar, consciousness, is also one of its many qualities. Lastly, and given the confusion as to the intrinsic existence of the ether itself, the final word should be given to Einstein. We may say that according to the general theory of relativity, space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time, nor therefore any space-time intervals in the physical sense. But this ether may not be thought of as endowed with the quality characteristic of ponderable media, as consisting of parts which may be tracked through time. The idea of motion may not be applied to it. We have learned much of this celestial element we've been calling the ether, that part of chaos that is light, but put properly, The ether is the electromagnetic field as constrained by the relativistic dynamics of a void-like spacetime. But what of matter? Does it share in light's immaterial and fluid-like nature? Quantum field theory's answer is yes. At its heart, matter is not particulate, not even solid, but is also born of fields and is best understood as a wave. To see how this can be, we must turn now to the spooky dynamics of the quantum and ponder waves of matter.